Need it. Yeah. Is it on?
Now? Okay.
Okay. There we go. Easy. We're all coping this morning. Thank you for coming. I know that it's Saturday and it's beautiful, so I feel that any time that we get from you when we're in here is a blessing. We're gonna try to keep it kind of casual this morning. Really want to keep it more conversational. We really want to have a lot of involvement from you guys as well. It's a small enough room. It's Saturday. We're all here to converse and hang out, but we're going to be talking about ethics of social news gathering. I'm here with Kim Bowie and Fergus Bell. I'll have each of us kind of give a brief kind of reason why we're here talking about this to you, and then we're going to jump right into it. Really just kind of talk about some of the big ethical issues that are facing us in social news gathering. This is how, if you want to tweet at us or something, this is where we are. So I'm Mandy Jenkins. I'm the editor-in-chief at Storyful. I've been working in social news gathering for about 10 years, I guess. I guess that's a pretty long time. And I've really been seeing this evolve quite a bit over time. But these guys have been, I think between all of us, we have like 50 years of experience, so it's great.
My name is Kim Bowie. I've been doing social news gathering for, I guess, about the same time, right? Somewhere around there. I was an early social media editor, and I spent some time at Reportedly doing verification and social storytelling work, and yeah.
I'm Fergus Bell, and I started doing this full time on the 25th of January 2011, which was the day of the first protests in Egypt.
Very
so
specific.
I remember that because that was the day that I started and didn't go back to my old job. So that's why I remember it. But we've also all been involved in creating an ethics code with the Online News Association as well. So that's why we care about ethics. And
well, we also care about ethics because we're good people.
yeah.
But we'll just dive right in terms of some of the topic areas, and really we're going to try to kind of keep it to a few things that kind of come up a lot in social news gathering, and like I said, we really want to involve you guys. So I think as we go along, if something comes up and you want to yell at us about something, we embrace that. We don't have to wait for the end. Cool. Well, one of the things that I know that we always stress, and when we wrote the ONA UGC ethics code, was one of the first things that we tackled was the fact that verified information and what that really means. We want to make sure we're obviously sharing information, that we're sharing user-generated content, eyewitness content that is verified, that we know everything about that. But it's not nearly as straightforward anymore as it used to be. I know Fergus, we were just talking about this last night, about even what verification means and kind of who is doing the verifying is now kind of a question.
Yeah, so if you go and talk to any news organization or you talk to someone on the street and you ask them what verification means, I think everyone would have a different answer at the moment. There is no common standard amongst news organizations or even journalists. And I think one of the kind of evolving ethical issues around this is how we describe verification, especially, I say that but I'm against defining something like fake news because I don't think it can be defined, but verification, I really believe, can be defined. It doesn't just mean this is the person that captured it. It has to mean something like this is the person that captured it and this is actually what it's showing.
Yeah, the context is also really important.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people I get approached by a lot of technology companies who say, oh, our technology verifies this, our technology verifies that. Actually, it doesn't. It just tells you who was the person that captured it. And so for newsrooms and for journalists starting out in this world, it can look like there's solutions out there for this, but actually we're the solution still.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like when you go to the grocery store and things are called natural, right? Like you can define natural so many different ways, but there should be a common standard, like organic, which is also kind of a fiddly word actually. But it's just people can use different there are techniques that can get you toward verification, but not everyone does it the same way. So I think most of us have been doing it for a while, have like a checklist of things that we have checked and that we know that that's true, but it's the how and people tend to think the how means that it's verified. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, oh, I ran that through this program, so it's verified. Like, well, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. You don't know anything. You know that it was posted by that person, but you don't know what that person's motive was. There's all sorts of things that could happen, and there's ways to trick technology.
Well, and I think it's about the transparency of a verification process and for the audience to understand what that really means. And I would say that applies even outside of social news gathering. If we're saying this is how we know what we know and this is why what we know is important, and having the audience trust that. You know, if you have like a Perugia bingo card and we're talking about trust, that's that's your keyword for the day. But that's very much what comes at the heart of that too, is if we're talking about the process. I know at Storyful we have within every social news gathering piece that we're putting out every day, we have a very set list of information that we have to give and that always has to be filled in for every single story. So that's how do we know that this is the person that owns this? What is the context of how they captured this and what their role was in this situation? What was the time of this and how can we prove that it was on this date? You know, where did this happen? How can we prove that that's the case? Are there screenshots within maps and things like that? You know, we have lots of different pieces and parts that have to go into everything that goes out. And I think that anyone who's really doing social news gathering in an ethical manner has to have some kind of process built into what they're doing that the end user can sort of know what to expect if you're having that.
It's also an argument against automated verification in a way, because by showing you're working, you're able to increase trust, I think, in the process that you've done. If you rely on if you just feed something in and it spits it out at the other end and says it's verified, you definitely lose some of that transparency. I'd be really interested if there's anyone in the room that works for a news organization that has a defined verification process. A show of hands? No?
Ooh, no.
Or you just keep it all up here. Everybody's independent. I get it. It's helpful to write that down. I know that much. I think that that's been the best way to train new people in doing it. Anytime we bring someone into a newsroom is to really have a dedicated checklist of not only everything you should do when a story comes around, but knowing the expectations for how every story should go and what to look for, especially if it's breaking news and everything's crazy and you don't remember if you did this or that or that you communicated it.
It's also useful to show that to the public, right? So like not just for your own internal processes and knowing that the person who verified that thing 3 months ago did a good job, but it's also every time I have done like a thread or something about how I verified XYZ, it usually goes berserk. And I think that's because regulars, the general public,
muggles
do not necessarily understand how we verify things, and the more we show them how, I think that's helpful not only to us but to them, because my like sneaky goal in doing open verification is that I'm trying to teach people to be more media literate at the same time as like doing my job. So if I can show you how to reverse image search an image, then maybe next time your cousin's aunt does something, posts something on Facebook that's fake, you know how to prove to them that's wrong. You can win a lot more family arguments and be a better media consumer.
There was a panel yesterday about automated verification, and a few people have spoken to me about the threat of AI and bots. I am personally not so worried about this, because anyone that's been doing verification understands that it's not just verification is not just using a whole host of technical tools. It's about constructing a case for why something has been verified. And actually a lot of it isn't based on technical analysis. It's based on kind of the human analysis of things that are uploaded to social media. I think that's something that's not necessarily understood by a lot of people who consume news or who read about things that have been verified. And that's why talking about that process should hopefully, allow people to trust that it's not as big a threat as it might appear.
Yeah, like when I teach verification to students, I usually end up like saying, I need you to show me all of your work, because the likelihood is early on you will make an illogical conclusion based off of some evidence. They'll be like, oh, well, that tower in the background of that video in Syria looks like this tower. I'm like, well, that tower is actually a little different shade of blue, but you thought it was the same blue. If you zoom in, there are very small things that you can make a big jump, and then it just sets you on a different course. and we'll put you in a different place.
And sorry, Mandy, I know we're probably talking over time about this, but
Close.
yeah.
There's no moderator for this panel, so it's just out of control. We're just trying to moderate each other.
I'm also a big advocate of us adding value and kind of respecting the abilities of the audience now. So a piece of content is not necessarily a story until we apply something to it, which is really important in terms of verification. That is something that we can do. But also, our audience, journalists and news organizations are not in that privileged position where we get access to an expensive wire story or an expensive breaking news alert. Our audiences have access to the same original data or original sources as we do in quite a lot of these cases, and they need to see that we know what we're doing with these sources. If they can find the original source, we need to show that we can find it and talk about that transparent verification process.
Right. I think we'll keep moving on to our next part of the topic, and if there's anything you want to come back to with questions, we certainly can do that. But something I know that has been very much, at least in the discussion of social news gathering, not only within the industry, but I think amongst readers and amongst audiences, has been that they're seeing the outreach of journalists to eyewitnesses and participants in news events, and not necessarily liking seeing behind the curtain to some extent of how news gathering is happening. There was the Parkland school shooting in Florida a couple of months ago. There were tons of journalists everywhere in the world reaching out to students who were inside the school, and there was so much visceral reaction from other people to seeing that happen. And I mean, this happens in every story, but for some reason I feel like that one really captured people's attention, and there was a lot of discussion around it. Granted, people could have been better about it, and I think we can get into some of the ways to be better about how we reach out to people who are in the middle of a news situation. But there was a really interesting report after the fact on ABC Australia on their Media Watch program, where they had said that outreach on social media by journalists is kind of the new door knocking. When you'd have to go and show up at someone's front door after a relative has been killed or arrested or something, that is part of the process that readers never have to see, and if they had to see it, they'd be disgusted by it, but it's an important part of the reporting process. So they compared that to kind of a modern door knocking, but now that people have to see that, which I thought was pretty interesting, because I think if there's a way to do it right, there's a way to do it well and to be respectful and to care about somebody's safety, but that it is increasingly a very important part of the reporting process when we're talking about social news gathering. I know you guys, we all have to do this, so we all know a little bit about it.
I think the difference between that the door knocking analogy is I get, but it's not quite accurate, because it's like instead of having one local reporter doing the door knock, you now have the world's press bashing down the door to see who can talk to the person first.
It's like if the paparazzi came to your house because your brother got in a car accident. It feels more like that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, too, you see things, I know that we were just talking yesterday when we were kind of putting this together, of saying that you see during these stories that not only is there just an influx of everyone coming to one or two people when they're having their worst day already, and then they have hundreds and hundreds of tweets replying to them from journalists, but you have multiples from the same news organization because there's nobody coordinating that. There's also nobody that seems to be asking the question of, A, do I need this now? Like, is it actually important that at this exact moment when somebody's hiding from a school shooter in their classroom that I'm bothering this child, who is actually a child, who's like 14 years old, to give me information? Can it wait until they're outside? But also, do I actually need this? Because, we see people who, like, I think one of the classics of this, I remember during the Paris terrorist attacks, there's a couple of eyewitnesses that are in the middle of things, and there were people working for like a local television station in Oklahoma reaching out to these guys. I'm like, do you specifically need to be the one that's doing this? Can't you get this from AP? Can't you wait? Like, you're subscribing to these services. Do you, as a local television reporter in the United States, need to be reaching out to somebody who is in the middle of a terrorist attack in France right now? Yeah. I would question that maybe that wasn't really a priority at that moment.
Yeah, my concern is that every local story is now an international story, right? So where something like when I started reporting ages ago, if you covered a local story, you would cover a local story and it would be local, and then maybe it would percolate up. But it feels like every single thing, like every school shooting, every terrorist attack, like I don't know why, like this TV station in Oklahoma needs to talk to that person. I can understand if that person is an Oklahoman, or has some link to that state, but it doesn't matter. And I think about this, that TV station is probably part of a parent company. It's probably like ABC, NBC, Fox. Why don't they just wait for their parent company to come out with that? Or why don't they subscribe to a service like Storyful where they're gonna get that for them and they don't have to go through that work? It's extra work when most of us don't have time.
And even those bigger organizations, I think there's this really strange thought that if you ask first, regardless of the situation that they're in, it's going to put you at the front of the line. And so I always think, well, okay, so you've messaged them 1 minute after they said they're scared for their life and they're hiding. Are they going to then just take out their little notebook and go, oh, well, that person asked me first, so I'm going to make a note out of it, and that will be the very first person that I go to as soon as I'm safe. I just don't think it's going to work like that. But we've also been talking about this for so long. Yeah. What's the solution?
Well, first of all, I do think one of the reasons why everybody piles on is because outreach is easy. It's hard to call somebody, it's hard to do reporting, but if sending a tweet to someone, anyone can do it. So it's the lazy way out. And I think that to some extent, having people sort of put a spotlight on outreach and on bad outreach, I'm not against shaming, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm not against shaming people who do it badly, because I think that it highlights for people that how you're supposed to be treating others. And to say, maybe this wasn't your time to be doing this, person who tweeted 1 minute afterward. We can wait for this. And I don't know, I guess, necessarily if there's a role for the platforms in this. I know that we've all been parts of various conversations over the years about how that might be mitigated in terms of either the platform somewhat when a news situation happens of seeing the one or two people who are kind of the original eyewitnesses and doing something in terms of, I don't know if it's like blocking or moderating or somewhat collecting those responses somewhere separate for them because they might be in a situation where they're not safe, they can't respond anyway. They could do some sort of blanket communication if they wanted to, but I think that there is a potential technical solution to help with this, but again, it takes that competitive element out of it as well, because that would kill the competition for that if there were some mediator in between.
There's also some really common sense structures that can be implemented within newsrooms. I've seen examples of at least 3 different people from the same organization communicating with the same person that is hiding in a dangerous situation, and replicated across 3 or 4 other major organizations all at the same time. And that's just bad newsroom management, that you have multiple people communicating with someone who's in mortal danger. Mandy, you said you're not against shaming bad people. What is the worst group for this? Who are the main, not the individuals or the organizations? Like the type of organization or the region. Who's the worst, and why do you think that is?
American cable broadcasters.
You think American cable? I would say American local TV broadcasters.
Yeah, that also works.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I know that there was one organization. I'm trying to remember what story it was. It was some usually incredibly tragic mass shooting story, and I remember seeing the same cable broadcaster had 6 or 7 different journalists in the same thread, clearly not reading the replies or even reading that other people had reached out. They clearly all just like reply. I'm not even going to bother reading who else has reached out to this person, what their answers may have been, because that's another key for all of this, to do this ethically, is when someone has tweeted something like that, look at how they've been replying to people, because if they're replying, for one thing, they're probably safe, so that's great. They might be giving, and they might be telling people, yeah, sure, you can use my photo, or this is what I know. Don't ask them again just because it was easy for you to hit reply and do that. I think that that's one element of it, is that they're not even bothering to look. I know in my newsroom, if I happen to see that multiple employees of mine have reached out on something, they are going to hear about that.
Someone's in trouble.
Someone's in trouble.
Yeah. I don't even think it's unethical. I think it's just lazy, shitty reporting, honestly. Like, who would go to, in real life, go up to someone's door and be like, so I don't know anything about this story and I don't know you, and then like be followed by their colleague and they knock on the door. It doesn't make sense to me. Like,
yeah, who here has enough journalists in their newsroom to send 5 people who don't know that each other are there to go report on the same person?
yeah, it doesn't.
Does anyone have an embarrassment of riches of people in their newsroom?
and a like a wealth of time. It
Yeah.
just no one has that. And it's just, look, you were just saying, Mandy, that oh, it would just be easier if maybe the platforms could just like, you could broadcast, oh yeah, you can use it, or no, you can't. But the fact is, I see people doing that.
Right.
I see
They're trying to do that on their own.
yeah, I see people like they'll post a video, they'll get like 1.5 billion replies, and then 2 minutes later they get so frustrated with it, they'll tweet again, they'll be like, anyone can use that thing, just stop bothering me. And then people keep asking, and I'm like, what is wrong with
They don't
you?
bother reading. Yeah.
The worst example I have seen of something like this is actually during the massacre of British tourists in
Tunisia?
yes.
Yeah.
And this person says, I've got 3 photos. I witnessed it. I can't talk at the moment. And then he gets bombarded with messages saying, are you there? Do you have any photos? And then he even gave his phone number, and which is very rare
Wow.
to happen. But he said he couldn't talk at the moment, but he gave his phone number. So you've got that for later. A journalist, used a message to this person on Instagram to say, can you tell me the dialing code for Tunisia?
Are you kidding me?
I am not kidding. And it would have taken less effort to put that into Google, Tunisia dialing code. And it just makes us look so bad. But I also think there's some assumptions that journalists make or don't even think about. That if someone has shared something on social media during one of these situations that they are broadcasting to the world, that is not the case. They are broadcasting it to their friends. It's often the quickest way to let their friends know about something. Also, you shouldn't assume, whenever I walk into a room, I don't turn my phone to silent, just in case something terrible happens and the world's press is going to try and get in touch with me. But what we're seeing now is people getting in touch with people who are hiding. Well, they don't have to respond to me. Yeah, but you're making their phone make a sound even. And maybe you didn't even think about that, but you should, because if you give the location away of someone who's hiding, that's an ethical question that you have to have asked yourself and that you have to be happy with for the sake of protectively getting that story for your regional bulletin in the Midwest US.
Leave the Midwesterners out of this.
Yeah, they're A-okay, man. No, I think it's also like, and what bothers me ethically is that one person can ruin it for the rest of us, right? So the instance I like to use is during the Pulse shooting, there was a young man who pretty much live tweeted the whole thing, and people just kept trying to get in touch with him. And his first tweet was like, I can't find my best friend, I'm not okay. And then a bunch of people like asked him, and he said, no, I don't want to. And he just routinely said no, and then he just posted, no, I don't want to talk to anybody right now, we can't find my best friend. We were hiding in the bathroom, I'm safe though. And then he posted again, I think we found my best friend, but he's in the ICU. And I don't know if he's going to make it. He keeps getting a request. And then the 4th one, he was like, my best friend died, and then keeps getting requests. And then the 5th one, he just takes some poor journalist, some person is just honestly trying to do their job, quote tweets them, and basically just says like, you fucking vultures, I will never talk to any of you. So that it's just, that one person was the person that broke that person, and he never did any interviews as far as I can tell. He was very, very upset, and I could read how upset he was. Like, if my best friend were in the ICU and I couldn't find them, like, I would not want to talk to media.
So what's the solution? What's the actual solution here? Because we're not going to create a new initiative, but
No more initiatives.
no more initiatives. But I think that there needs to be some solid advice. Like, if you work for an organization that owns multiple titles, or that you have a consolidated newsroom, or you are an agency subscriber, or how do you limit the number of requests by working collaboratively within your own organization, not even a competitive issue.
Right. No, I think that has to be part of your process. You know, we had talked about the verification process. I think that they're as part of a news gathering process. I know for us, we have an internal system for logging our outreach. This is who reached out to this person. This is when they reached out to them. It's done. That's logged inside of Slack and in Trello. And everyone can come back and see that across our team. We're not going to have a second. Like maybe they'll do it later, like a day later, hours later, or something like that, if nothing happened, and if it's not a breaking news situation by that time. But not duplicating it and having a system for not duplicating it, I think that's one step to start limiting it by organization at least, or by giant company.
You should have some step. Even like when I was at NowThis and we were integrating verification in, we put down this blanket rule, like instead of having everybody look for footage and do things, we designated one person for the whole story. Like this person, that's their job is to get permissions. And if things have permission, they put it in a certain part of a Google Doc. And if someone said no, they put it in another part of a Google Doc. There's also there is tech that will help you with this. Like Check exists, the AP Social News Desk thing exists. There's bunches of technology you could, but we use a Google Doc. It's
easy
hard.
enough.
Yeah. Or like we just said in Slack.
I screenshotted something the other day which I thought was terrible, because it's about outreach, and I mean maybe it's moving towards the permission side of things, but I can't remember what the story was, but a certain newspaper said, "Hi, could we use your image on this organization with credit, many thanks?" This person says, "No, you do not have my permission to use this image anywhere on your site or in print." And then everyone else who was following that thread then started posting the links to where they had used that video, that photo.
Gosh.
So this person had explicitly said no after being, and then they still used it.
Wow, that is a great seg into our next topic. It's like you set me up, because we're talking about clearance and permissions. So when we're actually conversing with this person, what happens if they don't give permission? I think that the question of how far fair use and fair dealing can go, I think that's something that a lot of news organizations fall back on in a breaking news situation. I can fair use this. It doesn't really matter. And they also don't necessarily care about the source. They don't care if they have the right person. They haven't necessarily done their homework on it. They think that fair use will cover everything. It's like, it'll cover you for now, for today, maybe, but if you didn't do your homework, you still might be wrong. People still could have a case, especially if they explicitly told you not to use something and then you did anyway. But I'm curious from you guys, how have you seen the evolution of the fair use question come in when we're talking about clearance?
It's just like when I took media law in college, in the U.S., right, fair use is an argument. It's not a rule. There's no law that dictates what you can fair use and what you can't. It is a legal argument that you can use in case you get sued. So like when we say, can we fair use this, what the real question that people are asking is,
will I get sued?
Yeah, do you think we'll get sued for this? And I would get people who have not thought about media law that are trying to they'll be like, well, I could probably fair use it. It's for a news story, so it's fine. I'm like, but that doesn't mean you can. Legally, maybe. Legally you can do so much more. But ethically, I don't think so. Like legally, that person, if that was in the U.S., could probably maybe be like, well, it was in the interest of a news story, blah blah blah. There might a very small argument, but there might be an argument. But ethically, that's not okay.
I've spoken to some. There was one example where I spoke to a very large news organization, and their policy was not to ask because then someone couldn't say no, and that's how they got around that. But I personally think.
See, that's legal, not ethical, though.
Yeah, I personally think that theft of content from an industry that only has its content and is fighting so hard for that to be respected and valued, I think it's disgusting for an industry who is focusing so much on that to steal people's content. And I don't really think there's an excuse for it, especially nowadays when people have the opportunity to monetize their own content. And that is their right. And saying, well, you know, we're going to publish it because it's important. A YouTube channel, you know, belonging to an individual often can have much greater viewership than a news organization. So, and if you are denying someone's right to someone's ability to make their own income off that content, then frankly, I think that's disgusting, and I think that it also erodes trust in the media. If we give people a bad experience and we take people's content, why on earth would they want to share with us? And why on earth would they respect, you know, our complaints about the value of our own content is decreasing?
It also makes a lot of assumptions. The way we do like permissions now is, I usually, like, one of the very first things I learned when I was starting to do social news gathering was, I asked somebody, it was during some shooting in Los Angeles, and I asked somebody, like, can I use this photo? And they said, yeah, sure. And then I was like, okay, so where did you take it from? we're trying to figure out what happens. And he's like, oh, that's not mine. It's a friend of a friend's. They texted it to me. And I'm like, oh. And he's like, you can use it, though. And I'm like, no, I can't. Like, you give me your friend of a friend's phone number so I can get explicit permission? Because that's, like, what I'm supposed to do. I think we're making assumptions that, like, the general public understands copyright laws. Yeah. And I mean, you can definitely speak to this, Mandy. Yeah. Like, they do not.
No, I would say that almost the majority of you know, content we're working with in terms of social news gathering day to day at Storyful, the first instance that we see of it is not owned by that person. And they're not doing it because they're deliberately misleading anyone. They just think that they're passing along something really interesting. People want to be part of the conversation when there's a big story happening. They might not even know anyone or have any connection to it. They might share something that's not at all even related to that story. They just found it on Google, but they were like, this seems like this is a thing, and I want to talk about the news. And they're not out there trying to trick everyone. There are people that are out trying to trick everyone, but most of the people that we're encountering are just participants of social media who know that they're going to be part of this large discussion. And then when we do find the right person, for one thing, that's like the most important question that we can ask is, did you film this? Did you take this photo? And being very explicit about that, because for one thing, if you are even legally, you're trying to get into a licensing relationship or something like that, or any kind of financial relationship with an uploader, if you haven't asked that question, you're just throwing your money away, because there's no way that's legally going to be upheld. And you know, something else too is that not only do they not understand copyright law necessarily the way that a journalist would, they don't know their own rights, which is why it's very easy for news organizations to take advantage of eyewitnesses. They don't know necessarily that they could be making money on something. Now, I'm not going to say that I want to encourage someone to be out selling horrific photos of a terrible news event, but people try to do things like fair use, really cool animal footage, or like really just interesting videos that they know full well that person could probably license and make money off of it. And they're just like, hey, can we use this? And not at all tell you what we mean by that. How long are we going to be able to use this for? What platforms is this on? Are you a distributor of content to other people? That they might not even know who they're giving it to or what the wide span of that is, and having that conversation is really important. It's that informed consent. It's not just asking and hoping to get a yes, but do they know what they're even saying yes to? Is definitely an ethical question that we have to make sure that we've answered as part of that process as well.
Asking for permission is a key part of the verification process as well, because you need to speak to, how can you do proper verification if you haven't spoken to the person that was there? I mean, that is something that, again, we're going back to the beginning when we talked about what does verified mean. How can you say something is verified if you haven't spoken to them or someone hasn't spoken to them on your behalf? And if you're a competitive journalist, you need to speak to them because you need to ask the most important question: did you take any other photos? Is there anything you didn't put on social media that we might be able to get? But I also wanted to, because I like to kind of try and make sure that there are some solutions out there. And don't quote me on this because I'm going to butcher the example, but in Sweden, there is actually a kind of insurance fund. So for the publishers, but it could be part of the union or something, but there is this pot of money where if journalists have made every effort to reach out and get permission but haven't been able to, and then someone comes back and says, you took my photo, this pot of money is there to compensate those people after the event once they're found. So, I mean, that's a very Swedish way of doing it, but they've thought about that and they've implemented something in order to do that. So I think that they can say in the very, we are doing this in good faith. We are reaching out to these people. If we can't get in touch with them, but we really need to use this for news, we have this insurance policy so that they will be compensated. I mean, I think that's pretty impressive, and I think that there are some lessons that need to be learned. Yeah, of course we shouldn't be having huge pots of money. We need to be careful, but we also shouldn't steal people's content.
And the other easy solution is to look at the language that you use when you ask for permission and you ask for rights to something. Like I think there's, my example of saying, can I use this, or can we republish this? That's not a good question. But on the other end of that spectrum is a not good question, which I see a lot of places doing, which is like, hi, I'm just gonna pick a large broadcaster. It's not necessarily them, but hi, I'm from NBC. Can I use this photo and can we publish it on all of NBC sites and NBC Universal in perpetuity? And you clearly, you know a lawyer wrote that, right? You know some lawyer somewhere was like, anytime you guys ask for permission, you gotta copy paste this legalese and then have people, tweet back with like hashtag NBC yes. That's horrible. That's the other end of horrible. Like I know why you're doing that. I know that it's making your legal team happy, but there's a middle ground in there where like you're telling them what they're agreeing to, right? You're telling them like, okay, can we use this just so you know it'll be used on all of the NBC sites, and I hope that, and on TV, and I hope that's okay with you. Like, why can't you just say that?
I've seen an example where someone has said, can we use it across any known sites in the universe? Now,
broadcasting live in Mars.
Yeah, and on platform. I mean, it's now becoming increasingly common to say on platforms, current platforms, and any platforms created in the future, which is an interesting thing, because if you get permission to use it on, can we put this on social media, or can we put this on Facebook? What happens if you get that permission? Fine, but what happens in 2 years' time when there's a new platform that you haven't got permission to put it on? How do you get around that? And that's why, so that legalese can be intimidating. I think Storyful has some good ways of not getting around it, but making it less intimidating.
Right. Yeah.
But it's necessary, because if you're going to get the rights to it, you need to be able to use it in the future as well.
Yeah, we have our clearance rights and an explanation of someone's rights all at a link, and it's written in we try to make it as in layman terms as possible that we can get our lawyers to agree to. But also lots of translations, because all outreach is usually done in English, which is also ridiculous when we're trying to reach out to someone who may not speak English. So having all of that translated as well across different languages by native speakers, so it doesn't just sound like it ran through Google Translate and also reads like a crazy person wrote it. We want to make sure that they understand their rights. And as a content licensing agency as well, we don't license and pay for everything, but that is a part of our business in helping people monetize their content. That is an onerous process, and it should be, because there's someone signing over their rights. That's a financial relationship. We have signed contracts with these guys. We have, we're setting up accounts with them at PayPal, and we're having extensive phone conversations with someone that owns that, so to answer any questions they have about their rights, about how it will be used, how they're going to be paid, because we wouldn't want to go into a relationship where we're managing someone's rights for them without them understanding what they're really getting into. That's a relationship, and that's not only trust in terms of the newsroom clients we work with, but we want to build a relationship based on trust with uploaders, so they can feel like they're not being taken advantage of along the way too. And it's something that drives me crazy is working in the world of licensing and in clearance is when I see news sites go in and offer someone, we'll pay you $2,000 for exclusive rights to this video that is a critical part of news gathering around a breaking news story. Like, did you need exclusive access? I mean, this is an important element of this story. Like, more newsrooms should have access to it, and you just paid up front what's essentially hush money so that no other newsroom can possibly use this. Like, I wouldn't know if it's an ethical question so much as just a shitty journalist question. But, I don't think that question gets asked enough in a newsroom. Like, should we have just, shelled out $2,000, $5,000 you know, how questionable is it that someone who put themselves at risk just got rewarded for that, or that they just sold a photo or a video of one of their friends dying to a network to exclusively have access to it, and no one else can even report on it now.
To play devil's advocate for a second, what happens if a news organization spent $2,000 sending a reporter or a videographer to a story that no one else covered, and they got the key shot?
Well, in that case, they did the work.
Okay, they paid the money because maybe the others didn't want to invest in covering that story.
Right.
So.
Yeah, but then other people would write about that story too. I mean, you know, that's aggregation. Yeah, but I mean, if someone says you literally cannot show, broadcast, put this anywhere on your site because we bought exclusive rights to it from an uploader who didn't know what they were selling, most likely. I think that's a different question.
What exclusive rights is.
Right, yeah. And I mean, it's one thing to do that with, say, you know, an interesting viral video or something, but doing that in the course of a breaking news story cuts off the public's access to it as well. Because often they ask them to take it down when that happens too. They're like, we don't want you to have this on your platform anymore either. We bought the exclusive rights to that and nobody else can use it. So, anyway, I can go about this one all day, but we'll keep going. Something that we talked about a little bit in some of the sessions of yesterday about the automated verification, but also has kind of become, I think, the fastest changing element of social news gathering these days is how we're reporting within online communities. So that could be like Reddit, 4chan, Gab, apparently the alt-right, wherever the alt-right hangs out. And also, you know, closed networks, things like WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, you know, where people are actually interacting these days. You know, it dovetails well with permissions and outreach because so many people have flocked to these apps because of the bad behavior of everyone, but also journalists on the public platform. So they want to go somewhere private to talk to their friends, to people who they, you know, share interests with. And we still want to talk to them. News still happens there. Lots of news is happening there these days. And it's not only a technical challenge to get into those groups, but I mean, definitely an ethical question as to how you as a journalist should be interacting in that space. I know, Kim, you've got some experience with this too, in terms of the social news gathering part, you know, how have you been approaching that?
I use closed networks. I don't try to report. Like if someone invites me to a group or something on WhatsApp, I try not to report based off of that, unless I'm very explicit in the beginning. I am a journalist. I want to talk to some people. So occasionally when I do when I go into a subreddit that I don't normally post in, because I do post on Reddit as a regular human, but when I go into a Reddit that I don't normally post in and I'm doing reporting work, I'll say, hi, and I'll use my full name. I'll say, I'm looking for some people. Mods, you can delete this if necessary. Because I go in with the feeling like I try to be as humble as possible about that because it's their space, it's not my space. And I'm just like stomping on in, so I try to say like, if I'm not supposed to be here, it's okay. And most of the time, the moderators of the subreddits are fine with it, and a lot of the times, the people who are running the WhatsApp groups are fine with it, but I think that transparency up front is important to say like, I'm a reporter and...
But this is nothing new in terms of ethical standards for reporting. I mean, most organizations have standards for undercover reporting, for how you can do that, when you can do that, what you can report on in kind of public forums and stuff like that. Yeah. And clearly identifying yourself. It seems so strange that people would forget to apply those same standards to this world.
It's because it's digital. I think there's still this like weird thing where like, well, it's just on the internet, so it's who knew? Who needs the ethics here? Right. And that's not necessarily like. It's odd that I have to remind people when I talk to them about this kind of stuff that like what I do as a social reporter is pretty much reporting. And like everyone treats it like this magical, amazing thing.
Yeah, this weird niche.
Yeah, like I've cracked some sort of code. Look, I just report, but I sometimes do it on Twitter. Like, you know, instead of walking to someone's store, I just DM them. And it's the same thing. It's the same ethics. It's the same process. I haven't changed any of that.
Yeah, no, and I think too, there are a lot of approach for that for journalists as well. I don't want to identify myself or jump into this Facebook group and have everyone know I'm a journalist because they won't like me or they won't let me in. It's like, well, yeah, because they know that you're probably trying to sneak in the back door. That's like sneaking into somebody's birthday party and then secretly reporting from there. Like, that's pretty much the same thing if you're trying to lie your way into a Facebook group, or you're hanging out within various online forums, even being open forums, and you're planning to actively report on things that people are saying. And there is a different standard for journalists versus the users of these platforms. It's fine for someone to be on Reddit with, their whatever crazy Reddit name they have, or on 4chan and be anonymous. I mean, that's the community. But again, it's not our community. We have to play by the community's rules, but we also have to play by our own ethical standards and our own rules as journalists under a code of ethics that says we're not going to go in there and mislead anyone into thinking that we're someone that we're not. And that's, maybe it's not fair, per se, that we have to use our real names, for instance, and the users don't, but that's just how it is.
I don't know why it's unfair. Like, why anyone would see it's unfair. Like, you signed up to be a journalist. Sorry, you signed up. You signed up for people to maybe not like you, because they had. I've been working on this research project about empathy for the American Press Institute, and in doing this research, it's just like I keep asking people who are very good at empathetic reporting, who are very good at working with communities. I'm like, if you're going into a maligned community, a community that does not deal well with media or has a bad history with media, mistrust, what do you, like, how do you employ empathy? And almost, like, to a T, almost every single one of them, from editors to Pulitzer Prize winners, have said, I just go in there knowing that I don't know anything, and knowing that this is their space, this is their house, this is whatever it is. And I do as much research as I can beforehand, but I understand that research does not mean I live that life. So if I live in South LA, so if I go in and do some reporting on South LA, I'm not going to be like, oh, I knew I grew up, I live in the hood, so I must know everything about growing up in the hood. That's not true. I know a little bit about it, but I don't understand. And I'm talking to you. I want to come into this Facebook group. I want to talk to these people because I want to understand. And I have some questions and I have some thoughts, and I would like you to help educate me. I think that's the best way you can go into any sort of network like that.
Right. Yeah. It's about being honest within the space. Yeah. Got one more before we'll kind of go to questions, because this one I think we can be kind of quick on. But talking about the live video and live tweeting, live reporting, which feels like this was kind of the original social news gathering, was live tweeting everything. I think a lot of us have kind of pulled back since then. We've seen some of the worst of live tweeting in years past, but it still happens in the sense of, we want to be able to use technology to show our audiences what's happening, but what are the limitations of that? Are we hurting an active police situation by doing this? Are we creating an unsafe situation by being a part of that? I haven't had to do very much of this lately, but I know that you guys definitely had done quite a bit when you were at NowThis recently, and I know that you've had to participate in the space a bit more.
Well, the thing about live stuff is it comes back to this like race to the bottom to be first thing. I like live tweeting and live video, especially like hosted live video from like a tense scene or like protest or something like that. I feel like it's very easy for rumors to fly, and then we don't often take the time to correct them. So what was it, the YouTube shooting? We were talking about this yesterday. With the YouTube shooting, I'm not with NowThis anymore, and I was looking at I was following that story just as a consumer, and oh my gosh, there was some really just not great live reporting from that. Like, I saw journalists that I like heavily respect that do really good work, live tweeting stuff that is not true, and they had not confirmed. I saw somebody, and I won't out the specific person, but I saw somebody take a screenshot of a WhatsApp group and say that was between them and some friends, and somebody worked at YouTube, and he said, "Oh, I think I saw the guy. It was a guy, and he was in a full vest and gear. It was really scary." That none of that was true. None of that was true, and that person later was like, I didn't even think about it. I posted, like, that person didn't even want me to post that. That was a personal conversation, and it wasn't true. And I'm like, why did all that fly out the window? Because you wanted to be first. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter
And again,
anymore.
that's a value add as well. You know, back to what Fergus said earlier, like what value do you add to a story in doing live tweeting if you don't actually know what you're talking about? All you're doing is creating more noise.
Yeah.
I think I'd like to just pivot to live video for a second. I worked at the very beginning of Syria coverage, really, and we worked with live user-generated content. And we had to learn a lot of things about that very quickly because we were working with people who were live streaming from rooftops. And very quickly we had to work out, well, actually, we need to work out where this is. But if we could work it out very quickly, then someone else who wanted to stop that live stream could work it out very quickly, and that's what they ended up doing. And the people who were doing it would eventually just set up remote cameras and kind of start the stream when they weren't there. But so many times we caught the shelling of the cameras. And that was a long time ago now. That was quite a few years ago. And I'm not sure that people have learned. People who are now working in other countries where it's not a war situation, but there are similarly dangerous situations, there are so many lessons that could have been learned from that haven't been. And that seems quite, I don't know why, maybe because Syria is a very faraway place and people can't see the similarities. But that was really something that struck me and stays with me. Also, live video is much easier to verify. I personally believe, because it's quite difficult to manipulate something that's live, especially when you know a situation's going on. And so it can be really, you can really want to use that content, but again, people are familiar with live content because they've seen it live on TV. But that is so different to using for a broadcaster to use it when they have a 5-second delay on it, a control room that can kill it if something happens, versus the ability to embed live UGC on a site with no kill switch, where your audience can see everything that's going to happen. Right.
Yeah, they might be seeing somebody die in real time on your website. Is that really something that you want to be showing to people?
Yeah, I also think, like, back to Syria and protests, I don't know that people that create UGC live video really understand the state of press freedom and how dangerous it really can be. And we perpetuate that by sharing things and sharing things because it's interesting. You know, like I will see people that are in other countries where there's not great press freedom, or you know, somewhere where there's a lockdown, and I'm like, I think they're going to get arrested if I repost this to my very large following.
But a lot of the reason they did live video and why live video was so important in Syria was because it was then stored instantly in the cloud, and it wasn't on their devices.
No, that's an argument to use it, but it's like, at least for me, it's like, I know the risk that they're taking. Do they know the risk that they're taking doing that? Yeah. And am I ignoring the fact that they don't know the risk of doing that by rebroadcasting that live or like sharing that live? There's a difference between like me watching it as a journalist, taking notes and writing a story about it, and then me sharing it with the millions of people and putting that person at further risk.
I completely agree, and I remember an example from outside the Pulse nightclub as well, people streaming live, and you have the ability, everyone has the ability to go live, but they don't necessarily have the experience in going live in a news situation. And I don't mean that to be patronizing to the people who do it, but there are decisions that go into where it's safe to set up a live shot, especially in a situation where people are being trapped inside a building. You don't necessarily make the decision to film live because what will the person inside do if they realize there's a live shot on them? Will they want to stop it? Will they act up for the camera? Will they potentially try and harm the person who's filming live? With no backup of a news organization or safety training or experience, I think it's an incredibly dangerous situation. And by showing that might have really fast breaking news value to us can sometimes be irresponsible, especially when it quite often doesn't have value in that context.
Should we take some questions?
Yes, I think it's a good time to take some questions on that. Yeah, I know we've been up here chattering around, but I'm sure you guys have questions here. Who wants to go first? All right.
There's a mic coming to you for the live stream.
I think
that the powers that be will insist that we have microphones.
Hi, I'm a college journalism professor from Miami University of Ohio, USA.
Ohio.
Yeah. My question actually goes back to your first points about verifying. It's a constant question I get from students. How do you verify something you found on Facebook, on Twitter, on Snapchat, that person is real? And I'd really like to know what's really on your checklist. You talked about calling or contacting the person, but what else is on your checklist?
I know for us, the kinds of things that we're looking into is really trying to paint a picture of who is this person and what's their connection to the story and what can I find out about them online based on that. You know, what's their posting history? What do they usually talk about? Where are they usually posting from? Who do they talk to? You know, those are signs of not only just to be creepy, and it is creepy, but it's also about figuring out if they're a real person and what their relationship is to the story in terms of digging in to see where they fit in, and also what other platforms they're on, because it may be that I found them on Twitter, but the best way for me to reach them is on Facebook Messenger or through YouTube or Instagram, that they may be more prolific on another platform, and that might be a better place for me to reach out to them or to have a conversation with them or to find a phone number for them. So it's really about putting together almost a quick social background on who this person is as part of the verification process. Like, yeah, I know that the photo or video is not necessarily about them, but as the source, they're the most important part of it. I know you guys might have other things you do.
The two things I usually stress that there's three things. There's who is this person? The date, is the date right? Is the weather right for the date? Is it the right time of day? Are their shadows correct? There's like lots of guides out there for this, or one of us can send you one of our guides. And then the third thing I usually look is location. So is that thing shot where, or taken a photo of where it is? And for that I usually use background. You know, like, does the horizon look the same? Does it look like it's from a building, from down low?
You see street signs.
Street signs. The best thing about the U.S. is that we label freaking everything in the U.S., like everything. In other countries, that is not the same. Like, doing stuff in Syria, it's very difficult to verify because a lot of Syria looks very similar. Like, I almost always just, you look at the mosques in the background, and even then, it's really hard.
Most of my verification is done on the social history side of it, so how something has appeared, looking into their posting history. But if you Google any one of our names in verification process, you will see one of our many write-ups on the exact process that we implement, because we can share afterwards.
We could go on
as well.
all day about it.
Yeah. we all like do trainings regularly.
Yeah.
So.
Other questions? Yeah, over here.
Hi, my name is Maaike. I'm a student from Holland, and I was wondering, because we were talking about, you know, the explosion of outreach and people who are almost journalists who are almost forgetting ethics because they want their story to be out first. It's almost a clicks competition, right? If I have it first, then maybe my story will go around the world, and maybe I will make some more money, or maybe my newsroom will be more known. How can we stop that? Because everybody is doing it. Everybody thinks we need to be the ones that make this news, that are interviewing these people to be more known. So how do we stop this? How do we stop this? Click competition, yeah.
Oh, I wish I knew how to stop this, because it's been going on long before we had the internet. But I think the more that people could realize, and I wish there were more case studies that newsrooms would kind of come out and be honest about, as to the difference in performance of sites of stories they were first on versus the ones they weren't, because anyone who pays attention to the audience knows that the audience does not care who was first. It's going to be the best story, the most interesting story, what tells them the most. It might just be that someone wrote a better headline and they were better at their search engine optimization. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why something could perform better. It's not necessarily because they were first.
We've been giving the signal to wrap up.
I know.
Yeah. I think very quickly, the only thing I would add to that is maybe in newsrooms, when we verify and look for information, we'll be like, oh, that's fake, and we'll just throw it away. Again, this goes back to my sneaky thing. Try to educate people as much as possible. If you find a fake thing, tweet about it. Show people it's fake, tell people why it's fake, show your readers why it's fake. If you messed up on something, write a column about it. Talk about how you messed up, how other people could avoid this mistake. I think if we set ourselves up as examples, then other people hopefully will latch on.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, guys. Sorry, we'll have to grab afterward. We're getting all the wrap-up signs here, so. Or can we get one more question in? Are we allowed? Is that okay?
No.
He's
Okay.
got that.
I'm getting mixed signals
Wait, no,
here.
he's got a very quick question.
Okay, one more.
Arthur from Digital Communication Network. You mentioned that you incentivize some of the, actually, this is your business model.
Right.
To pay the ones who are giving you footage. But what are the ways to incentivize people giving opinions about stuff, or expressing their like expertise comments on issues, on news? Do you have an experience with that?
For us, we're often highlighting people who have, or whether not necessarily insights, because opinions are, I don't know, I feel like everybody has one. It's not necessarily always great, but I think the best way that any newsroom could be, elevating the best work that someone is doing is to be featuring that work and crediting it properly, elevating that and bringing that into the conversation. I mean, I know you guys might have more experience with that than I do because we're working so much with content. But
yeah, I think if you want like an audience opinions, or you want to solicit more opinions of like not just experts or interesting people, that there's things like Harkin is doing really good work of like ask specific questions and to people and then try to get a lot of answers back. I think that's the best way to start, and then you can very clearly see who.
And elevating the constructive ones.
Yeah, elevate what's best.
Yeah. Is that it?
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
all.
you.
That was fun. We should do that all the time.